Of course, cars and trucks will not disappear entirely. Here, again, some reasonable adaptations can be brought to bear. In my book, I advocated banning the sale of new cars, as was done in the US during World War II. The benefits are numerous. First, older cars are overall more energy efficient than new cars because of the massive amount of energy that went into their manufacturing is more highly amortized. Second, large energy savings accrue from the shutdown of an entire industry devoted to designing, building, marketing, and financing new cars. Third, older cars require more maintenance, reinvigorating the local economy at the expense of mainly foreign car manufacturers and helping reduce the trade deficit. Fourth, this will create a shortage of cars, translating automatically into fewer, shorter car trips, higher passenger occupancy per trip, and more bicycling and use of public transportation, saving even more energy. Lastly, this would allow the car to be made obsolete on about the same time scale as the oil industry that made it possible. We will run out of cars. We will run out of cars just as we run out of gas. Here we are only a year or so later, and I'm most heartened to see that the US auto industry has taken my advice. On the other hand, the government's actions continue to disappoint. Instead of trying to solve problems, they would rather continue to create boondoggles. The latest one is the idea of subsidizing sales of new cars. The idea of making cars more efficient by making more efficient cars is sheer folly. I can take any pickup truck and increase its fuel efficiency by 1,000 or 2,000% just by breaking a few laws. First, you pack about a dozen people into the bed, standing shoulder to shoulder, like sardines. Second, you drive about 25 miles an hour down the highway because going any faster would waste fuel and wouldn't be safe with so many people in the back. And so there you are, per passenger fuel efficiency increased by a factor of 20. I believe the Mexicans have done some extensive research on this area with excellent results. Another excellent idea pioneered in Cuba is making it illegal not to pick up hitchhikers. Cars with vacant seats are flagged down and matched up with people who need a lift. Yet another idea. Since passenger rail service is in such sad shape, and since it is unlikely that funds will be found to improve it, why not bring back the venerable institution of riding the rails by requiring rail freight companies to provide a few empty boxcars for the hobos? The energy cost of the additional weight is negligible, and the hobos don't require stops because they can jump on and off. And only a couple of cars per train would ever be needed because hobos, as you know, are almost infinitely compressible. And they can even ride on rooftops if needed. One final transportation idea. Start breeding donkeys. Horses are finicky and expensive, but donkeys can be very cost-effective and make good pack animals. My grandfather had a donkey while he was living in Tashkent in Central Asia during World War II. There was nothing much for the donkey to eat, but as a member of the Communist Party, my grandfather had a subscription to Pravda, the Communist Party newspaper, and so that's what the donkey ate. Apparently, donkeys can digest any kind of cellulose, even when it's loaded with communist propaganda. If I had a donkey, I would feed it the Wall Street Journal. And so we come to the subject of security. Post-collapse Russia suffered from a serious crime wave. Ethnic mafias ran rampant. Veterans who served in Afghanistan went into business for themselves. There were numerous contract killings, muggings, murders went unsolved left and right, and in general, the place just wasn't safe. Russians living in the US would hear that I'm heading back there for another visit and would give me a wide-eyed stare. How could I think of doing such a thing? I came through unscathed somehow. I made a lot of interesting observations along the way. One interesting observation is that once collapse occurs, it becomes possible to rent a policeman. Either for a special occasion or generally just to follow someone around. It is even possible to hire a soldier or two armed with AK-47s just to help you run errands. Not only is it possible to do such things, it is often a very good idea, especially if you happen to have something valuable that you don't want to part with. If you can't afford their services, then you should try to be friends with them and to be helpful to them in various ways. Although their demands might seem exorbitant at times, it is still a good idea to do all you can to keep them on your side. For instance, they might at some point insist that you and your family move out to the garage so they can live in your house. This may be upsetting at first, but then is it really such a good idea for you and your family to live alone in a big house all by yourselves with so many armed men running around? It may make sense to station some of them right in your own house so that they have a base of operations from which to maintain a watch and patrol the neighborhood. A couple of years ago, I half-jokingly proposed a political solution to collapse mitigation and formulated a platform for the so-called Collapse Party. I published it with the caveat that I didn't think there was much of a chance of my proposals becoming part of the national agenda. Much to my surprise, I turned out to be wrong. For instance, I proposed that we stop making cars, and lo and behold, the auto industry shuts down. I also proposed that we start granting amnesties to prisoners, because the U.S. has the world's largest prison population and will not be able to afford to keep so many people locked up. It is better to release prisoners gradually over time rather than in a single large general amnesty, the way Saddam Hussein did it right before the U.S. invaded. And lo and behold, many states are starting to implement my proposal. It looks like California in particular will be forced to release some 60,000 of the 170,000 people it keeps locked up. This is a good start. I also propose that we dismantle all overseas military bases, there are over 1,000 of them, and repatriate all the troops. And it looks like that is starting to happen as well, except for the currently planned little side trip to Afghanistan. I also proposed a biblical jubilee, forgiveness of all debts, public and private. Let's give that one half a decade. But if we look at just at the changes that are already occurring, just a simple, predictable lack of funds, as the federal government and the state governments all go broke, will transform American society in predictable ways. As municipalities run out of money, police protection will evaporate. But the police still have to eat and will find ways to use their skills on a freelance basis. Similarly, as military bases around the world are shut down, soldiers will return to a country that will be unable to reintegrate them into civilian life. Paroled prisoners will find themselves in much the same predicament. And so we will have former soldiers, former police, and former prisoners. A big, happy family with a few bad apples and some violent tendencies. The end result will be a country awash with various categories of armed men, most of them unemployed, and many of them with borderline psychotic. The police in the United States are a troubled group. Many of them lose all touch with people who are not on the force, and most of them develop an us versus them mentality. The soldiers returning from a tour of duty often suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder. The paroled prisoners suffer from a variety of psychological ailments as well. All of them will sooner or later realize that their problems are not medical, but rather political. This will make it impossible for society to continue to exercise control over them. All of them will be making good use of their weapons training and other professional skills to acquire whatever they need to survive. And the really important point to remember is that they will be doing these things whether or not anyone thinks it is legal for them to be doing them. I said this before and I will say it again. Very few things are good or bad per se. Everything has to be considered within a context. And in a post-collapse context, not having to worry whether or not something is legal may be a very good thing. In the midst of a collapse, we will not have time to deliberate, legislate, interpret, set precedents, and so on.